The ice at the South Pole is over 2 miles thick, but that did not stop a Chinese team from uncovering a massive artificial dome hidden in the dark. They found a metallic wall that was frost-free and humming with a rhythmic pulse like a ticking clock.
There's been a lot of talk about underground bases in Antarctica, and certain satellite photos show mountain areas that have unusual caverns in them, literal windows.
Hands down, this is the most significant discovery in history. But it came with a heavy price. A strange infection is spreading, and the station has been wiped off the map. This is the deal. The dome is open now, and whatever was inside is starting to move across the planet. Massive anomaly found under the frozen waste. The ice at the South Pole is over 2 miles thick, and it is heavy enough to crush a heavy submarine like an empty soda can. So when Chinese radar picked up a massive open space right underneath their station, they assumed it was just a small glitch in the computer. It is not that simple, though, because there has been a lot of talk about underground bases in Antarctica for a long time. Certain satellite photos show mountain areas that have unusual caverns in them that look like literal windows into the earth. The radar readings showed a perfect geometric shape, which was a massive hangar hidden in the dark. They sent a camera down the borehole to see for themselves, and the video feed showed a metallic wall that was frost-free and humming with energy. They found the one thing that was never supposed to be found by humans. And then the screaming started, which the survivors now call the Kunlun Anomaly. See, in 2018, China decided they were done guessing about what was under the snow. They sent a team to the most remote point on the continent, a place called Dome A. They built Kunlun Station right on top of the thickest ice sheet in the entire world. Their official mission was to study climate change, and basically they said they were looking for old air bubbles trapped in the snow. But that was not the whole story, because they brought heavy-duty ground-penetrating radar that is usually used to find oil or hidden bunkers. When they turned it on, they found something that defied the laws of geology. Here is the deal. Natural rock looks messy on radar, and it scatters the signal in every direction. But this thing was smooth, and the radar waves hit it and bounced back in a perfect clean curve. It was buried under 2.5 miles of solid ice. The sheer weight of that ice should have crushed anything flat to the ground. But this structure was standing strong, and it was shaped like a massive dome that was roughly the size of a football stadium. The scientists at the surface checked their machines because they thought the cold had broken the sensors. They recalibrated and fired the radar again, and the same image came back. A perfect hollow dome hidden in the dark. It is not that simple, though, because as soon as the radar beam hit the object, the station power grid started to flicker. The magnetic sensors went haywire, and it was like the object knew it was being watched by the team. The team leader, who was a man who had spent 20 years on the ice, looked at the data and realized this was no natural rock formation. Nature does not make straight lines, and it definitely does not make perfect domes deep underground. They labeled the site Anomaly G1, and Beijing gave the order to keep quiet. They did not want the Americans or the Russians to know what they had found in the snow. The team was told to switch from scanning to drilling because they were going to punch a hole straight down into the mystery. But there was a big problem, because the ice at that depth is not like the ice in your freezer at home. It is under so much pressure that it acts like solid concrete. Whatever was down there was emitting a strange interference that made the drill bits dull faster than normal. The crew worked in shifts fighting the brutal cold while the machinery groaned and sparked. But the deeper they went, the stranger the readings got for everyone. At 2,000 feet down, the temperature should have been steady, but instead it started to rise. It was not by a lot, just a few degrees, but in Antarctica, that is a massive red flag. It meant something down there was generating heat like a motor. A volcano might do that, but volcanoes do not create magnetic pulses that disrupt radio communications every 30 seconds. And get this, the pulses were rhythmic like a heart beating. Boom, boom, boom. It was like a clock ticking in the deep. The team started to get very nervous because they were isolated and thousands of miles from any help. They were standing on top of something that was waking up. The lead engineer wanted to stop because he said the vibrations from the drill might trigger a collapse. But the orders from headquarters were clear. Do not stop until you hit the target. They wanted to know what was under the hood. What most people do not realize is that Antarctica has always been surrounded by rumors and ghost stories. Old maps from the 1500s show the coast without any ice. Pilots have reported seeing massive openings in the snow. But this was the first time a government had hard data. They were about to knock on the front door of history, and everyone was holding their breath. The drill was only a few hundred feet away from the target depth, and the tension in the command tent was so thick you could cut it with a knife. They were about to breach a seal that had been closed for millions of years. The crew braced themselves as the drill bit took one final plunge into the unknown. The silence that followed was broken by a sound that would haunt the survivors for the rest of their lives. Chasing echoes through the impossible layer, the sound of a drill hitting rock is a low and grinding crunch that vibrates in your bones, but the sound of a drill hitting a void is a high-pitched scream as the tension releases all at once. That is what happened at 3 in the morning, and the rig suddenly lurched forward. The resistance dropped to 0, and they had punched through. But instead of hitting water or rock, the drill bit was spinning in empty air because they had breached the dome. Immediately, a blast of air rushed up the borehole, and it smelled like ozone and old metal. This was a scent that had no business being in the cleanest air on Earth. Everyone is obsessed with finding alien life, but no one thinks about the consequences of actually finding it. The team quickly pulled the drill string back up, and they swapped the bit for a high-definition fiber optic camera. They lowered the cable down mile after agonizing mile while the interference grew stronger. The video feed on the monitors was snowy and distorted, but they could still see. The audio picked up a low hum like a massive generator running in the distance. So, here is the deal. When the camera finally cleared the bottom of the ice sheet, the entire room went silent. The floodlights on the camera rig illuminated a surface that was perfectly smooth. It was dark and reflective and looked like black glass or polished titanium. It curved away into the darkness and stretched beyond the range of the light. There were no rivets or welding marks or any signs of assembly. It was a seamless shell, and that is putting it lightly. The sensor data showed that the material was harder than diamond. The laser rangefinder tried to measure the inside of the cavity, but the beam just kept going. The dome was not just a small room. It was part of a massive complex. The camera rotated to look at the ceiling where the ice met the metal. The ice had not frozen against the structure. There was a gap and a cushion of air, as if the dome was repelling the glacier above it. Then the camera picked up something else along the rim of the structure. There were etched lines that were geometric and sharp and precise. They did not look like Chinese characters or English or even ancient hieroglyphs. They looked like math. Pure and complex geometry was etched into the surface. The scientists were staring at proof of an advanced civilization or something else entirely sitting at the bottom of the world. But here is the catch. The heat sensors spiked again. The temperature inside the cavity was 60 degrees warmer than the ice above it. It was room temperature, which meant the system was active. It was not a ruin, it was a base. The lead scientist, who was a man who did not believe in ghost stories, was sweating. He typed a message to Beijing attaching the first screenshots. He told them the target was acquired and the structure was artificial. The reply came back instantly telling them to secure samples and do not retreat. They wanted a piece of it because they wanted to own the technology. So, the team deployed a remote-controlled cutting arm to slice a small fragment from the outer shell. The laser cutter, which could slice through heavy tank armor, barely scratched the surface. It sparked and hissed, but the black material did not even get warm because it absorbed the energy. Basically, the dome was indestructible. So, they changed tactics and decided to take samples of the ice directly touching the dome. They figured that if this thing had been here for millions of years, the ice around it might hold clues. They used a thermal scoop to grab a core sample from the interface layer. This was the slushy and foggy ice right next to the metal skin. As they winched the sample up, the cable began to vibrate from the load. The canister felt heavier than it should have been. The magnetic readings went off the charts, and it was like they were reeling in a giant magnet. The closer it got to the surface, the more the camp electronics failed. Laptops crashed, and the generators sputtered while the lights in the mess hall blew out. The crazy part is the crew felt it too. They reported a buzzing in their teeth and a metallic taste in their mouths. Some of them got nosebleeds, but the Geiger counters were reading 0. They were pulling up something that did not follow the rules of physics. The canister broke the surface and was locked into a containment unit. The team gathered around the thick glass window to look at what they had found. What they saw inside the glass was not just old ice, it was something that was starting to move, breathing life into the black filaments. Ice is supposed to be dead because it is just a crystal that sits there and does nothing. But the core sample inside the containment chamber was different. It was cloudy and filled with a swirling gray fog. Floating inside the meltwater were tiny black threads. At first, the scientists thought it was just dust or soot from the drill. Then, someone turned on the ultraviolet light to check for bacteria. As soon as the light hit the sample, the black threads snapped to attention. They did not just drift, they swam like they had a purpose. They coiled together and formed complex shapes while twisting like snakes in a basket. The room erupted in shouting because this was not geology anymore. This was biology, but it was wrong. Nothing survives at that depth, and nothing survives that much pressure. And certainly nothing reacts to light after being buried for 1,000,000 years. The team hurried to analyze it and used a robotic needle to extract a drop of the water. They put it under the electron microscope, and the image that popped up was a nightmare. The threads were not cells. They looked like machines. They were tiny organic machines with interlocking gears made of biological material. They were dormant until the light hit them, and now they were waking up, and they were hungry. The lead biologist ran a sequence test, but the machine just spit out an error message. No match was found in any database. He tried again, but it still said unknown origin. The genetic code had 4 strands instead of 2. It was completely alien to Earth. Basically, they had found a shadow biosphere, which is a type of life that evolved completely separately from us. But here is the catch. The sample was not just alive. It was a hive mind. The separated drops of water tried to move back together and pushed against the glass slides. It was intelligent goo. The scientists realized that the dome down below was not just a building, it was a containment unit. They had just let the prisoner out of its cell. Suddenly, the containment box started to crack. The glass was reinforced and bulletproof, but tiny hairline fractures were appearing all over it. The black threads were vibrating at a frequency that shattered the glass. The team panicked and tried to freeze the sample back down with liquid nitrogen. It did not work because the cold just made them angry. The threads clumped together into a black ball pulsating with a purple light. Everyone is obsessed with the idea of a virus escaping a lab. But this was worse. This was raw and ancient biological material that could rewrite DNA. One of the junior researchers, a young guy named Chen, got too close. A seal on the glove box failed and a tiny puff of the mist escaped. It touched his skin and he did not scream. He just stared at his hand. The veins in his arm turned black instantly. The infection traveled up his arm in seconds and was visible under the skin. He fell to the floor and his eyes rolled back while the whites of his eyes turned entirely black. He started speaking, but it was not Chinese. It was a series of clicks and low grinding sounds, the same sounds they had heard on the radio interference. The entity in the ice was taking him over. The rest of the team backed away terrified, and they sealed the lab door. But Chen stood up unnatural and stiff and looked directly at the camera. He smiled and his teeth were covered in the black slime. And get this, the dome below the ice sensed it. The moment the infection took hold, the ground shook. A massive tremor hit the station and the floor buckled. The dome was reacting to its lost child. The sensors showed a massive energy spike surging up the borehole. The dome was powering up and sending a signal, and the receiver was right here in the room with them. The team leader grabbed the emergency phone and dialed the red number for Beijing. He yelled that they were losing the station. But the voice on the other end did not offer a rescue. They offered a solution that froze his blood. They told him to initiate Protocol 0. That meant self-destruction. They were not going to save them, they were going to bury them. But before he could hit the button, the door to the lab exploded outwards and the nightmare began. Final stand against the ice shadow. The explosion was not fire, it was pure force that knocked everyone down. The lab door flew across the room and crushed a rack of servers. Chen walked out, but he was not a man anymore. He was a puppet. The black filaments had burst through his skin and formed a kind of exoskeleton. He raised a hand and all the lights in the room exploded. The darkness was total except for the purple glow pulsing from his veins. Chaos took over the station. The scientists scrambled for the exit and slipped on the ice and snow. The wind outside was howling in a blizzard that was burying the station, but inside it was getting very hot. The energy surging from the borehole was heating the bedrock. The ice foundation of the station was melting and steam hissed from the floorboards. The entire base was sinking into a slushy grave. So, here is the deal. The team had to make a choice. They could freeze to death in the storm, or be consumed by the thing inside. They ran for the snowcats, which are the tracked vehicles parked outside. The engines were frozen solid, but they cranked the starters and prayed for a spark. Behind them, the main building of Kunlun Station began to collapse. The metal beams twisted like licorice. The heat from the borehole was now a geyser of steam shooting hundreds of feet into the air. It is not that simple to just drive away in Antarctica. The visibility was zero and the GPS was dead because of the magnetic interference. They were driving blind through the snow. The driver of the lead vehicle floored it and just aimed away from the heat. In the rear-view mirror, the survivors saw a sight that would haunt them forever. A beam of blue light shot up from the drilling site. It punched a hole through the clouds and reached straight into space. And that is putting it lightly. This was not just a distress signal, it was a beacon. The dome was calling home to something in the stars. The light was so bright it blinded the night vision cameras. The snow around the base turned to water instantly and created a massive lake in the middle of the frozen continent. The station and the infected crew members slid into the water and were swallowed up by the earth. The shockwave hit the vehicles moments later and lifted the heavy snowcats off the ground. They tumbled through the snow and rolled over and over. When they finally came to a stop, silence returned to the plateau. The blue beam cut off and the heat vanished. The flash-frozen water sealed the hole instantly. It was as if nothing had happened at all. There was just the wind in the dark. Only 3 survivors made it out of that vehicle. They huddled together and checked their radiation badges. The badges were black and completely exposed. They knew they were walking dead men. But they had one thing left, which was a hard drive. The team leader had ripped the server backup before fleeing the command tent. It had the radar scans and the camera footage of the dome and the video of the infection. They walked for 12 hours in the blizzard until a supply plane from the coast spotted their flares. When the rescue team picked them up, they did not say a single word. They just handed over the drive. They were flown to a military hospital in China and placed in isolation. They were told they had suffered hallucinations from a gas leak. They were told to forget everything they saw, but you cannot delete data once it is out there in the world. Waiting for the doors to open again. Weeks later, the video hit the dark corners of the web, and people started talking. It was grainy and shaking, but you could clearly see the metallic curve of the dome and the blinding blue flash. Then, just as quickly as it appeared, it was scrubbed from the internet. The page was not found, and the video was removed. It vanished. But the internet never truly forgets what it has seen. People had already downloaded it, and they analyzed the frames. They saw the impossible geometry, and they saw the fear in the scientist's eyes. Joe Rogan talked about it on his show. He asked the question everyone was thinking. Why is Antarctica so guarded by the military? Why did all the world powers sign a treaty to never fight there, but also to never let civilians explore? It is the only place on Earth where all the enemies, like the US and Russia and China, work together. Maybe they are not protecting the ice. Maybe they are guarding the prison. The leaked documents describe the living ice as a weapon, or maybe a terraforming agent. If that stuff gets into the ocean, it could rewrite the biology of the entire planet. The filaments thrive in cold water, and Antarctica is the biggest reservoir of cold water on Earth. If the dome released more of that material during the explosion, it is already in the ecosystem. Basically, we might have triggered a slow-motion invasion. The scientists who survived have not been seen in public since 1929. Their families were moved to new cities, and their names were erased from university rosters. It is a classic cleanup job, but the signal is the problem. Amateur radio operators in South America and Australia have reported strange rhythmic pulses coming from the south ever since that day. The pulse repeats every 42 minutes. It is too slow for a machine, but too fast for a geological event. It sounds like a beacon or a countdown. The Chinese government has sent 2 more expeditions to the area, but this time they are military convoys and not scientists. They are building a perimeter around Dome A. They are not drilling anymore, they are building a lid. So, here is the deal. We always look at the sky for threats. We worry about asteroids or aliens coming down. But the scary truth is the threat has been here the whole time. It was sleeping under our feet and buried in the cold, and we just woke it up. The discovery at Kunlun Station was not a triumph of science, it was a warning shot. The dome is still down there. The ice has frozen over the hole and is hiding the secrets again. But the heat signature remains. Satellites show a constant warm spot at Dome A. Something is generating power and something is active. The question is, what happens when it decides to come up to the surface? We think we are the masters of this planet, but we are just the tenants living on top of the roof. The landlord just turned on the lights in the basement and he is coming upstairs. We need to ask ourselves if knowing the truth is worth the risk to our lives. Because next time the dome might not just send a signal, it might open the doors for good. Could the government be hiding an ancient prison under the ice? What if that living ice has already reached our oceans? Tell us your theories in the comments below. If you enjoyed this mystery, make sure to like and subscribe for more secrets. Are we truly alone on this planet?